Hello students, and welcome to another new video lesson from Notebook on Business Studies. This is Reena, and everyone says that she has a green thumb. A green thumb? Oh yes, a person who is excellent at growing plants is said to be having a green thumb. She plans to open a nursery with a bank loan, and from her savings till date, her tiny nursery is up and running. There are orchids, cacti, succulents, creepers, flowering plants, and so many other plants all around. After 1 year, the business has made moderate profit, and Reena wants to grow the business. Along with plans of expansion, she has plans of exports as well. But all her plans and thought get only one bridge for conversion, and that is finance. Be it this tiny nursery or any other business on earth, the lifeblood of any business is finance. The funds which are required by any business to carry out varied activities is called business finance. Any business usually starts off with contribution from the entrepreneur, but this amount is usually not sufficient. The funds are usually required for different purposes. Classification of fund requirement can be into fixed capital requirement and working capital requirement. In case of the nursery, Reena incurred a number of fixed costs at the beginning. She had to purchase the plot of land, a number of small machineries, a few furniture to start her project. All these are the part of fixed capital. So if we understand properly, the funds for such fixed assets remain invested in business for a long period of time. The fixed capital requirement, however, varies according to the size of the business. In case of the tiny nursery, it is relatively lesser as compared to a huge manufacturing concern. Now, after establishment, the day-to-day running of every enterprise constitutes various expenses. Reena incurs so many costs for her nursery every day. The watering and manuring of the plants, cleaning expenses, record-keeping expenses, staff salary, and so on. This is categorized as the working capital, like for meeting current expenses, like salaries, wages, taxes, rent, and which is used for holding current assets such as bills receivables or stock of materials. Whenever a business looks out for growth and expansion opportunities, it requires additional fixed and working capital requirement. Just as Reena sits down and evaluates her available sources of finance, let's understand the entire gamut of sourcing of funds and their respective classification. Sources of funds can be on the basis of period, on the basis of ownership, on the basis of source of generation. On the basis of the period, the sources are further classified into three. The long-term sources are those funds which suffice the financial requirement for more than 5 years. They are generally consumed towards fixed assets. Includes equity shares, preference shares, retained earnings, debentures, loan from financial institutions, loan from banks. The medium-term sources are those funds which suffice the financial requirement for more than 1 year but less than 5 years. Includes loans from banks, public deposits, loan from financial institutions, lease financing. The term sources are those funds which suffice the financial requirement less than a year. They are generally consumed towards current assets such as accounts receivables and inventories. Includes trade credit, factoring, banks, commercial paper. Short-term financing is extremely popular with seasonal business which builds on inventories, anticipating selling requirements, or wholesalers, and manufacturers who needs to maintain huge levels of stock or inventories or receivables. On the basis of ownership, we have owner's fund and borrowed funds. Owner's funds, as the name suggests, is the fund exclusively provided by the owners of the enterprise. In case of the tiny nursery, the savings of Reena, those were invested while setting up of her project, can appropriately be called the owner's funds. Apart from capital, it includes the fund which gets reinvested in the business. Issue of equity shares and retained earnings are primary sources of owner's funds. Borrowed sources denotes funds raised through borrowings and loans. The bank loan which Reena took at the inception of her nursery is an example of borrowed source. Such loans from commercial banks and financial institutions, issue of debentures, public deposits and trade credit are all important sources of borrowed fund. A fixed rate of interest which is predetermined is the cost of such funds. In addition to this, some security stands as mortgage against such loans. Lastly, on the basis of sources of generation, we again have two types: internal sources and external sources. Funds, those are generated from within the enterprise, are denoted as those from internal sources: plowing back, reinvesting profits, accelerating receivables, or disposing of surplus inventories are all examples of internal sources of funding. Internal sources are cheaper forms of finance. However, internal sources can fulfill the finance requirement only to a limited extent. External sources include those outside the organization. Suppliers, lenders, and investors are examples of such sources. Funds come in through issue of debentures, borrowings from commercial banks and financial institutions, public deposits, to name the important ones. External sources are costlier norms of finance. However, external sources can fulfill the finance requirement to a great extent, especially when the requirement is large. With this, let's close this lesson for today. You guys stick around inside the nursery while we come back with our next part of the video lesson on sources of business finance.